Welcome back to the Sales Pulse podcast. I'm Marla Koupal, the Sales Conversation Architect. I help new and experienced sales professionals tune up sales conversations and enhance sales outcomes. Let's talk today about someone you might know. Do you know someone in sales who's always waiting to be ready? What is ready? Let's look at some things that you might have noticed in yourself or others. You are thinking of reaching out to someone, but you don't. You're thinking about following up, but you don't. You're thinking about how to ask a better question, but then you're pausing. It's not because you don't care. It's not because you don't know enough. I was inspired to talk about this today after reading a quote from Mark Manson. He says, "The people who wait until they're ready never are. The people who just start realize they could have been ready at any time they wanted." Think about that. This behavior shows up in sales all the time, not in dramatic ways, but it shows up quietly. It shows up in conversations that don't get started. It shows up in questions that don't get asked. And it shows up in those follow-ups that get pushed to tomorrow. What most people miss is not confidence, it's conversation timing. Let's look at what I mean. When a seller waits to feel ready, they tend to do three things. They rehearse, they overthink, and they prepare answers ahead of time. But the buyer, they don't know what you're planning. The buyer isn't waiting for your readiness. They don't even know what it looks like on you. The buyer is sitting there in confusion, some anxiety, maybe they have curiosity, maybe they have hesitation. When you, the seller, delay, the buyer doesn't have any place to go. They'll just move on because you didn't engage them in a conversation. Or worse yet, they start solving their needs without you. So don't wait. Readiness loses the sale. My suggestion is you lose those heebie-jeebies about being ready and discover what actually changes when you just start a sales conversation. Stop performing. You don't need a script. Start observing the buyer. Start hearing what the buyer's saying. Notice their messaging. This will help you create any conversation that you'd like to have. Lose the pitch because it was never a fit for anyone anyway. The moment you begin the conversation, even if you feel it's imperfect, you get access to something you can't get in preparation. You get real information. You get feelings. You get insights. You get struggles from the buyer. It's not just what they say, but it's what they hesitate on, or what they skip over, or what it is that they soften or harden. Notice those emotions and listen to both the words and the actions. Just listen to everything. Listen to what they say. Listen to what they say. Listen to what they don't say. Begin to understand how they are actually going to formulate their decision. That's where the sale is made. And that's where the conversation is created. Some of the best success that I see in sales is when you get a salesperson who hasn't been overtrained, over-scripted, over-pitched, over-practiced on. They just go in knowing they don't know what they're doing, but they're going to find out what the buyer needs. And out of that creates a really great conversation with some sales outcomes. Too many people get caught in the practice of selling. Selling is life, and it's conversations in action. And each of those conversations is different for each buyer. Only your product is the same, but how they're going to use it is going to be different. Don't get stuck in that pattern of thinking that you're not ready for sales or that sales conversation that you've been postponing. You do have the skill, you do have the drive, and just because you think you don't know enough is not a reason to say you're not ready. So stop getting stuck. Stop losing sales because you don't feel you're improperly prepared. Just start. Starting is the best response you can ever have in a sales conversation, and it actually feels the most responsible. Just start. It might feel like you're trying to respect the sales process. There is no process. The process is the conversation. So stop fooling yourself. There is no such thing as ready. Sales is always uncomfortable, and that's what you need to be successful. You'll never know what makes people choose how they choose. You'll get 75 to 80% right after a few years, but you always have a surprise waiting for you, and you never know which conversation it will show up in. I've had some of the most upset, irritated people having a conversation with me. They weren't upset with me, but they were upset with their situation. They were upset with the product. They were upset with the fact that they had to buy something and it wasn't in their plan right now. But we still made the sale simply because I was present for them, not because I was ever ready for their emotional state. If buyers are worried already, they don't need you being worried. Your worry will create distance between you, the buyer, and their choice. Create a selling shift for yourself. Instead of asking, how do I get ready for this conversation? Start asking yourself every morning when you get up, what can and will I learn? You're going to walk away with some history that you can rely on later. That question will change everything. You don't need the perfect opener. You need to be real with yourself and the buyer in front of you. Maybe try something like, what got you looking into this right now? Or maybe you say, what are you trying to sort through at the moment? Notice what happens. You're not presenting, you're not explaining, and you're not proving anything. You're letting the conversation create itself with the buyer taking the lead. This way, the buyer's thinking. They're making the decisions that will make your sale. Let's knock this idea around a little bit more. Waiting to feel ready is often just a cleaner version of hesitation. So if you're saying, I want to be ready, then you need to tell yourself, nope, I'm hesitating. When you have no conversation, it means that you have no clarity about your purpose, no movement forward, no opportunity for a decision from the buyer. Let's get you started on your sales conversations before you feel ready. The best way to make a sale. When a seller begins the conversation, begin it with curiosity. Focus only on getting to know the buyer and how the buyer feels and what's top of mind for the buyer. That way they feel acknowledged, and when they start talking, now you are creating the conversation because they are organizing their own thinking. And that will create the momentum that you need for the conversation. You're not pushing for a result. The opportunity is to bring clarity to the buyer and then to present your options. Let the buyer be more engaged than you are. Successful sales don't happen if you only prepare for the comfort that you need to be out there in those conversations. Get conversations going, even if they feel helter-skelter, because at some point, people will know you're real. You can summarize what's being said, and you can bring any conversation back on track. A two-way conversation allows the buyer to build their clarity, and it makes those yeses a lot easier. Clarity helps people make choices. Now, notice one more thing. When you start before you feel ready, you're going to start recognizing patterns in others and yourself faster. And you'll begin to recognize which buyers are serious, which buyers are just exploring, and which buyers are stuck. This way, you're not chasing every conversation. You're responding to the right ones. And how a seller can move forward is by talking to everyone and then discovering who is the right person to continue the conversation with. Here's the result of that process. Buyers want to work with the right seller. When you let the buyer take the lead, you're listening to them and they're going to feel you are the right seller. Buyers want someone who can meet them in their thinking. The key takeaway for today is readiness does not come before the conversation. It comes from the conversation. It's created each time you have a conversation. Get started sooner rather than later. Once you start, realize that you were ready before you knew it. Selling conversations do not have checklists. They explore, resolve, and let the buyer choose. This week, for your activity, I want you to pay attention to yourself. Notice when you're waiting to be ready and just get going. Notice when you're over preparing and ask yourself, what would happen if I just started this conversation? The moment you do this, you give the buyer something they've been waiting for, a place to think. This is where sales begin, when you give the buyers room to think. I'm Marla Koupal, the Sales Conversation Architect for small business teams and individuals needing sales conversations before they feel ready. You can find the Sales Pulse podcast on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify.